Muy buenas a todos, soy Andrés Maduro de Finca Dracula, bienvenido a nuestro canal de YouTube. Estoy aquí con nuestro amigo Tom Mirenda, que está acá para conversar con nosotros sobre la fascinante red de conservación de orquídeas por jardines de orquídeas que él está armando alrededor del mundo. Es una iniciativa increíble en donde busca lo que le llaman citizen science, que es ciencia del ciudadano, en donde cada uno de nosotros da nuestro granito de arena y juntos podemos lograr lo que es la conservación de las más de 30.000 especies de orquídeas que están en el mundo, muchas de las cuales se encuentran en peligro. Entonces vamos a conversar un poquito sobre cómo se origina esta red, qué es lo que va a abarcar y cómo ustedes pueden participar en la red. Este video va a estar grabado en inglés y vamos a tener subtítulos disponibles en español que pueden habilitarlos aquí en un botón, no sé, de derecha a izquierda. Y con esto arrancamos. So hello Tom, welcome to our little piece of paradise here in Finca Dracula.
I am for one very thankful to be here at Finca Dracula. I kind of invited myself to come here, but we've been having a great time. This is if you haven't been yet to Finca Dracula, I think that you will be stunned and amazed and really pleased with what you find here. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And it's also a model for the kind of conservation efforts that I'm interested in creating and promoting.
So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your background, which is, I think is very important in understanding how this initiative was born and what its aims are.
Sure. So most people know me from two things that I do. Number one, I was the orchid collection specialist at the Smithsonian Institution for about 17 years. I have a long-lasting relationship with them, and we started some things while I was there, such as the North American Orchid Conservation Center, which is another wonderful organization that's kind of a model for how to do orchid conservation in other places in the world, not just North America. But also I've been writing for close to 20 years now for the American Orchid Society. A few years ago, I was the chair of their conservation endowment committee, which actually dispersed some funds to several projects around the world involving orchid conservation efforts in various places. And one of the things that I found from that experience and my experience at the Smithsonian is that there are a great number of people that really care about orchid conservation, that they're all over the world, that many of them are working very, very hard at what they're doing, but they are not well coordinated or connected. And I think that we live in a day and age with all of this social media and all of these connections amongst orchid growers all around the world. I think we have the passion and we have the talent and we have the ability to organize and create something really, really fantastic to preserve the orchid species of the world. There's amazing work going on in Central Africa, all over Latin America, Wenxing Kerner in China. Literally, the people in Taiwan have incredible things going on. And a lot of them are really effective, but I think the real key to getting long-lasting and effective orchid conservation is to collaborate and to help each other with our goals. We're going to introduce you to three concepts: ex situ, in situ, and circa situ collections.
So ex situ means ex is outside, situ is the place where the plant naturally occurs. So an ex situ plant collection could be me having
You having Paphiopedilum
species from Asia here. that's ex situ because it doesn't occur here.
Right.
Yes. In ex situ conservation, the big problem is that in nature, the plant is adapting to grow in that specific environment, attract its pollinators, and survive there. But in a greenhouse, it's adapted to grow under nice greenhouse conditions with fertilizers. And
there's that, but there's also the fact that we tend to select plants on their ornamental value.
Yes.
So we might choose a Lycaste because it's got great color and form, but that's not necessarily the actual, this might be an exceptional form of the species that a pollinator might not even recognize in the wild. Plants that are in cultivation have many things that we don't quite understand and are not necessarily suitable to be used to bring plants back to the wild.
Yeah, and if a population has been driven down to extinction, then those plants that are found in a collection are the only things left, and they have a value because you can bring those plants back outside. So they're still important, like a last resort. It's not something you want to bring back immediately.
So ex situ collections have first the problem that they tend to be in developed countries, and that's not where the biodiversity is. So botanic gardens have a great history of being great repositories for species, but generally speaking, ex situ collections. And even in the global strategy for plant conservation, in their many goals, one of the goals is that the plants are preserved in their country of origin. There's very limited things that you can do with ex situ plants. You can seed bank them, but to actually contribute to the conservation of plants in their natural habitat, which is the ultimate goal, it's very hard to do that from a distance.
And then you have, in the other side of the scale, you have in situ conservation, which is considered the golden standard for conservation. It's where you have the plant in its natural environment. So a protected park is a good example of a in situ conservation. The problem is that in situ conservation is not necessarily foolproof, because even if the park is designated as a protected area, we see that here in Panama where parks we don't have enough rangers to take care of the parks, and people go and poach the plants. If it's a really common orchid that is growing everywhere, it's not a big deal. But if it's a plant that is very rare and has high ornamental value, like some Primipediums and some of the Cattleyas, then we are in big trouble because they don't reproduce that much, and the few plants that are found there are poached very easily. And then in situ conservation is still susceptible to natural disasters like fires, landslides,
climate change and deforestation are
exactly
the really big problems.
And that's where another concept has been introduced very recently, and it hasn't been. It's pretty new actually. I heard it first time from Nicola Flanagan from a program that they did in Colombia that it was very inspiring.
The definition of circa situm conservation is to be growing plants in gardens or reserves within their natural ranges. So we're not talking about taking a plant from India and growing it in Panama. We're talking about the plants that grow in the surrounding forests naturally, but using them in a garden situation as they have done so successfully at Finca Dracula, and that I've seen in so many other places. One of the best examples is the gardens at Inca Terra Hotel in Peru. And they have created a magnificent garden that's full of orchids, but also every other kind of plant that coexists with those orchids.
And then the circa situ provides the enhanced benefits that in situ doesn't have, which is you can make sure that the plants are protected from poachers because it's a private property. You also have the added protection against, as much as possible, against fires and other sorts of conditions. And then if the plant is endangered, we can give it an extra bump. You know, add some fertilizer here. Maybe if it fell from the tree, we can put it back up. Something that isn't considered that kosher when you think about in situ conservation, where you try to leave the plant survive by itself.
If a plant falls, that's part of the circle of life for a plant like that. But in this situation, we want to grow these endangered plants. We should have natural pollinators, but if we don't, we can take our toothpicks and we can cross-pollinate individuals of plants, and which we can then either bank, or we can create new populations that can go into other reserves or go around the property here.
You told me a little bit about the conservation efforts already being done with orchids and with plant species around the world, because in order to understand how this network fits in the global scheme of plant conservation, it's important to know what's being done already.
Right, and so I a few years ago, when I was still at the Smithsonian, I delved into what was being done in an organized fashion for orchid conservation around the world, and I discovered several things that were really interesting. And number one, probably not many people outside of the scientific world know that there is actually a global strategy for plant conservation that many botanists in the world are collaborators on, and that it's also being helped by an organization called BGCI, or Botanic Garden Conservation International. And what BGCI did was they gathered all the information from all of their, it's an international organization of botanic gardens, actually focused on the conservation effort of plants. So they decided, since so many botanic gardens have orchid collections, they decided to do an assessment based on all the orchid collections of the world to see how effective conservation efforts really were. And it was a beautiful assessment, and it really told us a lot. But one of the things it taught us was that, first of all, the way we assess whether a plant is endangered is by a process called a red list assessment. And so I wanted to learn more about how to do red listing, since it seemed to be the first step for deciding whether or not a plant needed protection or not. And I took a workshop at the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, workshops to learn how to do red listing, and realized that it's a very involved process and difficult and quantitative, and it really takes a massive effort for each individual species. And this is a really hard thing to do with epiphytic plants.
Must cost a lot of money.
It does, because you really need scientists and graduate students and a team to do these kinds of studies. And so I do believe it's important to have this very accurate information, but the information also changes. Like these assessments are supposed to be done every 10 years. Now, imagine you have 30,000 species that need assessing, and they have to be redone every 10 years. It's a monumental, and I would argue, pretty much impossible task. And that's kind of what the BGCI assessment showed us, was that a very small percentage of plants had been red listed or assessed for red list. And an even smaller percentage of those plants were in cultivation in botanic gardens. Because of the difficulty in getting this information, this important information, we're doing a very, very small job, a very, I don't want to say a poor job, because people are very earnestly working on this, but we're not getting a large chunk of the orchid species assessed for their conservation status, which impinges on our ability to conserve them.
Makes sense because all the large botanical gardens are in European countries, in
European and North America. And that creates another problem. Well, several problems in these, what we are referring to as ex situ collections.
After the plant is added to the red list, the IUCN that is keeping track on who has what is only keeping track on what botanical gardens have, and they're not keeping track of what other people have, like we in Finca Dracula. And in Colombia, for example, there's many big successful nurseries that have a lot of very endangered species, and they're propagating them, but those don't count.
And not only that, I want to express something that dismays me a little bit. I think that many times the scientists that are engaging in conservation biology, they are reluctant to engage commercial growers or botanic gardens such as what Andres has here at Finca Dracula, or other kinds of conservation gardens that exist that have a whole lot more species than are actually in traditional botanic gardens. And so because of that reluctance, we miss out on the engagement of a very passionate community of orchid growers that I think have the best intention of wanting to conserve these plants.
Yeah.
And that is really where their heart is. That's why they do this, because they love the plants so much. So we're working on creating a way, a network of these kinds of conservation gardens that I know exist all over the world, because there are passionate orchid people in literally every country on Earth. How we can engage those people in the conservation effort. There are a lot of resources that are not being harnessed for conservation. The scientific community does really fantastic work helping us understand, say for example, which mycorrhizal fungus that they've isolated from the roots of an orchid aid in germination. It's incredibly complex stuff, very cutting edge stuff. But ultimately, the practical knowledge of the horticultural community, and that's you and I in botanic gardens and private gardens, it's that knowledge of how to grow the plants, the knowledge of commercial growers in terms of getting seeds into flasks and keeping those seedlings alive as they progress. There's not a lot of scientists that know that. So the practical aspects of the conserving of these plants come from the horticultural community. And so again, these are the people that we need to harness their knowledge and abilities and talent in order to actually conserve orchids.
This network would in part work to bring together all the orchid collections and gardens that are interested in participating in conservation efforts for the species that they have or that grow around them. And then you also have this collaboration on the more abstract part, or the basics of all, which is trying to figure out what really needs to be conserved right now urgently, and before doing some sort of preliminary assessment.
Yeah, one of the stumbling blocks is, of course, the red listing of the plants, because it's complicated. It takes a lot of time, and there's so many species that need to be assessed.
So it's 30,000 species, so it's 3000, and then it costs how much money to study one species? At least $10,000. Just put a money.
I would think at least.
1, 2, 3, 0. So how much is this? So it's $300 million. Trying to figure out what orchids need conservation, and this is every 10 years.
That's right. The red list assessments expire.
Yes.
So you have to
$30 million per year. That's ridiculous.
I mean, orchids are valuable, but
yeah, there's not that much, and For many species, just a quick talk to the people that are involved in their research and their discovery, or people that live in the area, they can quickly tell you if that plant is critical, endangered, or not.
Yeah, I think that I'm not saying to do away with the red list assessments. It's important.
No. Yes.
But if we engage the local community and local experts about what is endangered, what is so highly endemic that their population is endangered by someone taking a plant or someone driving over a plant or something. Yeah. So we know these things. Local experts know what's rare and what is not, what is everywhere, which and what is not. I think that we can maybe take some shortcuts.
With this preliminary assessment, we could coordinate our efforts between all of our gardens, and we can then do priorities in what needs to be reproduced with the people that have labs.
By adopting the circa situm strategy and having a lot of gardens such as Finca Dracula, but not necessarily as elaborate as this, but still, I mean, if you have land and you can grow orchids on your trees, or you can grow terrestrial orchids or lithophytic orchids in your backyard, these are valuable contributions of species that probably are not assessed and are not in botanic gardens already. So I believe that all of us that have the ability to grow their native species in their gardens, in reserves that they are a part of, or natural areas that they monitor, all of these things can and should be part of the conservation effort.
If we can spread between us the responsibility of taking care of these plants, even if it's not in situ, we'll make sure that species doesn't go extinct.
By creating this network, we feel that we will all be stronger, and we'll be able to help each other with things like fundraising. It's very hard to get maybe the funds you need to really be successful at doing orchid conservation when you're a small little garden in Colombia somewhere in the mountains. So the idea is to network, to coordinate our efforts, and when we have a global network of orchid conservation projects, we can create a big map of the world and show where work is being done. And we can ask people like Jeff Bezos, help us out, I'm just throwing his name out of nowhere, but he is a person who loves plants. I'm told he also has his own plant collection. So I don't think he's unique. What I'm saying is that by thinking of this as a global project, that we stand a better chance of actually getting the funds we need that we can then disperse, and we can supply students and graduate students and the expertise of people like us. So we have stuff that we can offer to you to make it worthwhile to be part of this network. And in return, we ask that scientists and conservationists have access to either tissue for DNA, or that you're willing to donate seeds that you might create to a seed banking effort. There's so many ways that you can get involved in orchid conservation, and so we hope to facilitate that.
So make a bridge between academia, research, and botanical gardens, and then regular folks in private places that are wanting to do this conservation.
That love the orchids.
And then formalize, give a voice, because it's important. All of us, we're doing this work, but we're not an official botanical garden, so we don't get the voice. There's one more aspect that I think it's important to mention, because we're running out of time. It's standards, and I think that's where this network would also help, because private collections tend to be very informal, because they're not a public institution, and we have to create standards like making sure that their plants are correctly identified, that we know where they come from, that the plants are available for research, And this is something that would be asked for the people that volunteer here, that they adhere to these standards with the plants. Because another thing that is important, we haven't mentioned, but it's very important, is that this is only for species, it's not for hybrids. Because we're trying to preserve what's found in nature. And then hybrids do help for display and education, but when it comes to conservation, it's only species. And if you have a species that you want to conserve and you know it's in danger, then it's important. We can volunteer in a program like this, where they would ask you to take care, identify, make sure it's correctly identified, and that if somebody wants to propagate them for research or for a seed bank, that you volunteer your plants, not necessarily the whole plant, just a leaf or a seed pod. And also, and I think it's very important, is that there's some guarantee that the future of the plant is there even if the person passes away, because we will be here not for too long and the plants stay alive, and we want to make sure that there's a continuity to this, which is given in botanical gardens but not necessarily so in private collections. And then this network can help solve this by finding people to take care of collections after their owners pass away. If we can help through this network, so that instead of having large botanical gardens with thousands of species, we could have a network of hundreds or thousands of mini reserves spread around the country. We make sure that those circa situ reserves protect the orchids in a way that even the parks wouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And not only the orchids, but also the surrounding ecosystem. Whoever is interested in participating, this is the email, and I'll put it in the description also. So,
and we'll be making a website that
pretty soon.
Can belong to, and there'll be updates.
And if you know people that are interested in something like this, let them know about this video so that they can get in touch with us. If you have a question, you can leave it on the comments. If you also want to participate, remember to sign up with Tom and send him an email. And then once he has a mailing list and all that, you'll be getting
regular updates about the progress.
And maybe he'll show up in your house too. Don't be surprised. So
don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
Be very afraid.
So thanks, Tom, for having this conversation with us. We're super happy to have you around here.
And thank you for a platform to reach a lot of individuals.
So we look forward to seeing this project grow and making this be a very important network in the plant and orchid conservation world. We'll put the link to his Facebook account here in the comments. Bueno, a todos los que vieron el video, recuerden suscribirse al canal si no se han suscrito y seguirnos en las redes de Instagram, Facebook y todo para estar atento a todo lo que hacemos en nuestros videos. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.